Discarded Beasts, File 2, Sunrise. A lot of people would imagine sleeping on a flowery field to be a cozy, comforting experience, from the soft and elegant blades of grass to the vibrant scents and varied sounds which echo throughout the night, to a blanket of the night sky and the watchful eye of the moon shining above all those who rest. Cleta was once someone who believed this to be true. Cleta was, in fact, very wrong. After the events which took place the previous night, she had decided to rest in the grass near the remains of her ruined home, the pleasant smell of death awakening her as it entered her nostrils from the corpse of the now lifeless creature within the ruins. She woke tired and sore from the third worst night of sleep she had the displeasure of experiencing. As it turns out, the grass is not comfy, but is in fact very sharp and full of various bugs and critters, some of which had taken a liking to her hat and her hair. As Cleta began removing the insects from her hat, she moved towards her home, determined to pack up anything she could salvage before finding some place to rest until she could find a new home. She had no friends and no family, just money and a cool hat, which was probably bug-free as Cleta plucked the final bug from her hat and tossed it into the underbrush where it came from. Taking a look around her home, she was only able to salvage a small amount of her belongings, mostly just clothes and a bit of food she quickly scarfed down. She didn't know when the next opportunity for food would be, and she was not about to travel on an empty stomach. Packing what she could took most of the morning, and by the time she was ready to move on, the sun had begun beaming directly above her. Taking one last look at her former home, she smiled, before setting off to find some sort of new housing for herself. She had somewhat of an idea where the nearest town would be, and she hoped she was capable of walking there without too much trouble. It wasn't too long before she had made her way down the mountain she lived on and towards the nearby river, where a small path had been set alongside the water. Following said path, she eventually made her way to what seemed to be a fairly large pond. By now, it was nearly sundown, and in the distance she could see the nearby town of Palmyra. Before she continued towards it, however, she was struck with a sudden, intense pang of hunger in her stomach. Taking a look around, she spotted a few fish slowly moving through the murky water. An idea quickly formed in her mind as she hid herself in a few nearby bushes, waiting for an opportunity. While the sun began to set itself over the horizon, Cleta spotted a fish coming closer to the edge of the water. It was a medium-sized fish, likely a juvenile of its species, but not a hatchling by any means. As it began to eat some of the plants within the water, Cleta's plans started coming into fruition. A nearby bird had also spotted the fish and was about to make a dive for it. Preparing herself, Cleta bit a small hole into her finger, from which blood began to seep out. As the bird swooped onto the fish, Cleta shot a spike of ice towards the bird, hitting its wing and causing it to fall into the water with a loud splash, which scared off the fish. Cleta had conflicted feelings about what she was doing. She knew on the one hand she could probably have just made it to the city and endured the hunger. However, on the other hand, she knew that the bird would have easily consumed her if she was a fish. As she approached the struggling bird, she watched it attempt to flee from her to little success. It was clear she had broken its wing with her attack, but that was not at the top of her concerns. That bird wouldn't need wings where it was going. Plucking the bird from the water with her uncut hand, she realized that she only had a plan to catch the bird, not what to do after the fact. As the bird struggled in her hand, she considered what to do. She could not make a fire, so cooking it was out of the question. She also didn't want the creature to suffer, so she was not about to let it bleed out. She then thought about how birds eat themselves, and then gave her an idea. Cleta collected herself, took a deep breath in, and ate the entire bird whole, because she was just a freak like that. With her hunger satiated, she continued towards the nearby town, once again looking for a place to stay. As the sun set over the town, she began to take a look around, noticing a few motels which might be able to house her. However, as she attempted to obtain a room, most of the inhabitants seemed to quickly leave the area. She assumed it was probably just bedtime or something. Entering the first motel, she approached the front desk. However, she found that there was nobody to be seen. Confused, she took a look around for a bit before deciding to check the next motel down the road. Surely they would not all be empty, right? They were all empty. Cleta thought she was in a ghost town, as it seemed almost everywhere was empty and abandoned. Place after place she checked, however each time she was met with an empty building. She was starting to think she was going crazy, before she took a moment to consider why a previously full town would be empty like this. She considered that maybe there was a big event in town, or that she came at a bad time, or that she really wasn't a town populated purely by ghosts. Her thoughts were interrupted by her coughing up feathers from the bird which she previously consumed. It was then that she realized that maybe, just maybe, she looked absolutely insane. The witch hat plus the drenched clothing plus the pleasant smell of swamp water filling the air meant fear in the townsfolk. She realized that she probably scared everyone off, and so, with one final motel left at the edge of town opposite where she entered, she took off her hat, put on her kindest expression, and pulled out a wallet full of money as she entered the final inn. It was by far the most interesting inn she had seen before, seemingly built into the side of a mountain, with the name The Ram's Horns misspelled on a sign hanging attached to the door. Entering the inn, she was almost instantly greeted by someone at the front desk. However, instead of being greeted by a human, as she was expecting, she was met by a Cerberus, a being with deer horns and a body covered in fur. "Welcome to the Ram's Horns. My name is Mark. How can I serve you today?" Mark greeted Kalita with a surprisingly energetic tone. "Oh, hello there. I was just hoping to get a room for a while. My house was recently destroyed, and I have nowhere else to go, and every other motel is seemingly empty." Kalita tried to sound as sympathetic as she could, hoping she would be able to convince Mark to basically let her live in the motel for a bit with enough money. "Oh, how tragic! I'll do everything I can to make sure your stay is as accommodating as possible. If you have the money, you'll be able to stay here as long as you like." Kalita, honestly grateful for Mark's attitude after the day she had, attempted to smile as she asked again, "How much is a room?" To which Mark responded, "Why, only 50 canines a night," which Kalita is easily able to pay for, handing over wisdom and asking, "Will this be enough to cover a few nights?" as she placed it on the counter, which caused Mark's eyes to go wide upon seeing the coin. "Absolutely! Please take your key. Your room will be the first one on the left of the hallway. Have a wonderful night." Kalita took her room key and headed off to her room, exhausted from the day she had. As she reached her door, she was surprised to see no keyhole, but instead a key-shaped slot on the door. She placed the key into the slot. She watched it sink into the door before forming into a handle. She grasped at the doorknob and opened the door to find a fairly standard hotel room, though by now she was far too tired to care. All she needed was a shower and a bed, and thankfully this room had both. She placed the items she was able to salvage from her home on her bed before undressing, showering, brushing her teeth, and relieving herself, but not in that order. She then took out a different set of identical-looking clothes, put them on, and flopped onto her bed, covering herself with the soft blankets before slowly drifting off to sleep. She thought of how kind the innkeep had been to offer her the first room down, as well as how strange the door-opening mechanism seemed to be. However, she let the thoughts leave her mind as she drifted off to sleep, letting her dreams carry her to the next file of her life.